Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, May 24th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Georgia and the governor's race and the election result that we just got that shows Governor Brian Kemp defeating Senator David Perdue by an astounding margin with 73% of the vote thus far, with about a third of the vote in. According to the Associated Press, Brian Kemp has won with about 73% of the vote. Now, this is not a finalized election result. What we do know is that the victor will be Brian Kemp. Right now, I am personally very surprised to see that Brian Kemp has done better than the Senate candidate Herschel Walker in the Republican primary. In a sense, it is surprising because this Senate race, this governor GOP primary, was never meant to be competitive, and looks like we got about 4% more of the vote in live. This is directly during the election results. The polls closed just less than 2 hours ago, going on 2 hours in just one moment. It's 8:59 p.m. On my side, Eastern time. So what we're finding is that Brian Kemp is doing significantly better in this primary than was otherwise expected. You know, David Perdue was this Trump-endorsed candidate who Donald Trump really struggled to get a lot of support and momentum behind him. Despite Donald Trump's name being the biggest name in the GOP right now, he simply couldn't overturn this primary. And to that extent, it came to a point where David Perdue couldn't even crack, it seems as if, about a third of the vote across the state. Now, David Perdue was supposed to be in a position where he wasn't even going to lose by an astounding amount. In fact, for a brief period of time, it looked like David Perdue could realistically win this thing. The political betting markets always had about a 60 to 40 odds for Kemp and Perdue, thinking that Donald Trump's presence and Donald Trump's influence on the Republican Party would eventually make enough of a difference that David Perdue would come out ahead, that somehow there would be this push from behind that allowed Perdue to win the nomination, and that simply, as we see now, just did not occur. Now, what you are finding is that Brian Kemp not only defeated the Trump-endorsed candidate, but again, outperformed another Trump-endorsed candidate who has largely had the field cleared for him from the very beginning. In fact, if you head over to the Senate election in the state of Georgia and you take a look at the Republican side, the numbers for Herschel Walker have always been solid, dating all the way back to August 2021. As early as April of 2021, Donald Trump endorsed Herschel Walker. He only endorsed David Perdue in December of 2021. And it was a very big thing that Brian Kemp had been the main enemy for Donald Trump for quite some time. The day after the election results were certified in Georgia, Donald Trump called out Brian Kemp by name, even went to extreme lengths as to suggest that maybe Stacey Abrams would be better than the existing governor, Brian Kemp. This was before Perdue was in the race. This was at a rally, and this was at a period of time where many Republican voters were dissenting from voting for Brian Kemp simply over the basis of election integrity and Brian Kemp's, in their words, inaction against the stolen 2020 election. And looking at what had happened and this final result, this shows that there is a very significant base that is backing incumbent Republicans, including Brian Kemp, despite Donald Trump making Brian Kemp practically his number one enemy this election cycle. If you take a look at any of the candidates who Donald Trump has endorsed against, meaning he did not choose this incumbent or this front runner, for instance, in North Carolina, when he chose Ted Budd over Pat McCrory, that wasn't a race that Donald Trump was super invested in. It was just more so an endorsement that propped up Ted Budd to victory, and it was successful. But when you take a look at other races where Donald Trump was more so unsuccessful, it doesn't always come through. But, there are races where you really don't see him that invested in, where he might have endorsed the losing candidate, and it's okay, a big whoop. But in this specific case, Donald Trump went on the complete offense against Brian Kemp, railed him following the 2020 election, went into 2021 bashing him, attacking him. David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler joined Donald Trump in rallies in January leading the 5 days up to the election, bashing Brian Kemp, attacking him, saying that he should have done more, that the election should not have been stolen, that they need to do more, that they need to overturn the election results because Donald Trump, quote unquote, won the state of Georgia if you count all of the legal ballots. Actually, that's a word that I'm taking from Brian Kemp there. But the point being that Brian Kemp has been Donald Trump's main target, and yet Donald Trump couldn't even get him under 70%. Donald Trump could not even get rid of Brian Kemp. There are plenty of people out there where Donald Trump's influence would have made a difference. And Georgia, for a brief period of time, looked like it could have made a difference. Following Trump's endorsement, this is literally the day after, there was a poll taken by Fox 5 Insider Advantage. And they found that the governor's primary was tied. Just about a third of the voters were backing either Kemp or Perdue, enough so that there was a tie. Then things started to get better for Kemp. He used his incumbency to his advantage. He started giving tax breaks on gas. He started doing things that were benefiting him. He started to reel in endorsements from former top officials. When Brian Kemp ran for governor back in 2018, he didn't have any endorsements. In fact, if you take a look at the initial primary, all of the endorsements went to Casey Cagle, the incumbent lieutenant governor. He got the current governor of Georgia at the time. He got Saxby Chambliss, a very recognizable name across the state. He got all of these former representatives, all of these state senators, all of these state representatives, and the NRA's endorsement. When you take a look here, looking for an endorsement list for Brian Kemp, he didn't get any. And he didn't get any for a reason. Ultimately, Brian Kemp ended up getting the most important endorsement in the second round, and that was the endorsement of President Donald Trump. Beyond that, there weren't any other endorsements for Brian Kemp leading up to the primary. So, looking at how Brian Kemp rode an endorsement from President Trump to victory, it's clear how an endorsement for David Perdue propped him up at least early on. I have made this point before, and I'm interested to see if it's true, and there obviously is no real testing of it, but Donald Trump actually only endorsed Brian Kemp about a few days before the primary actually occurred. So when that actually happened, it was quite surprising. It was about a week before the election, and Donald Trump made an endorsement for Brian Kemp. And following that endorsement, Brian Kemp started to do very well. Before the endorsement actually occurred, he was polling about 3 points ahead, tied in another poll, losing by 1 point in the other poll. But then it all of a sudden became a huge victory, and Brian Kemp ended up winning with 70% of the vote. But that endorsement was a week before. This endorsement for Perdue clearly had a bump and a difference on the outcome of the election, because what you find here is that Fox 5 and Insider Advantage, that poll shows us that a tie occurred the day after the endorsement from President Trump. But as the months went on, things started to get better for Kemp. Kemp plus 7, Kemp plus 9, Kemp plus 11, and now we're at a point where the average is Kemp plus 19, and that's off of 2 skewed polls where the rest of them were plus 32, plus 16, plus 25, plus 24, plus 25. You're at 26. You are looking at a lot of numbers here that are saying, hey, Kemp is going to win by a lot, and that wasn't the case before. It just simply was not. In fact, Brian Kemp has actually done better in these results than what the polls suggest. Exactly how it was in 2018. But except this time, Donald Trump doesn't endorse Brian Kemp. Instead, endorses David Perdue. I brought up the point about a cleared race within the Senate election because it is very important to note the fact that Herschel Walker has had this practically handed to him, and Brian Kemp had to fight for it. And even with it being handed to him, where Donald Trump cleared the field, quite literally pushed David Perdue out of the Senate race and into the governor's race. He took out all of the major candidates. You take a look at the Senate election in the state of Georgia, and who do you find on the decline list? A lot of people. The Attorney General of Georgia, Buddy Carter. These are, you have candidates who are being pushed out or told, hey, you shouldn't run. Doug Collins, who very clearly could have been lined up for a victory in this race, ran for Senate in 2020, lost to Kelly Loeffler in the primary. Who's next? Who's the runner-up? It's him. He ran in the past. He served in political positions in the past before. He was a sitting U.S. representative when he ran. So maybe he can run this time. No, was pushed out. Brian Kemp decided not to do it. Kelly Loeffler was exploring it for a brief period of time, decided against it. David Perdue initially filed the paperwork, decided to move himself out. The Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives, not going to throw his hat in the ring. Jeff Duncan probably wouldn't have gotten the Trump endorsement, but the Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, who's now retiring, not running with Brian Kemp again, and he's out. He's not going to do it. What do you find? A cleared field. And as a result, who are you left with? The Trump-endorsed candidate and one statewide elected official, the Agriculture Commissioner of Georgia, Gary Black, who is cracking about 14% of the vote. Who does Brian Kemp have as opposition? A former senator from the state who won a primary before, who won an election before, who ran statewide less than a year ago, had the entire nation focused on his name and the Democrats, and he still couldn't crack 1/4 of the vote. I set the bar at 1/3 earlier on in the video, 1/4 now. Again, 38% of the vote is counted. It could become different, but my point there wasn't about Perdue even specifically, but more so that Brian Kemp is outperforming Herschel Walker. 284,000 votes versus 305,000 votes. Trump's endorsement doesn't matter as much as we like to assume. There are plenty of states and plenty of districts where I would say, hey, the Trump endorsement makes all the difference. And he's viewed as this, someone who his endorsement says all. I will vote how Trump votes is essentially how I think many Republican Party voters look at these primaries, because if they're looking for guidance, if they're looking for someone who they trust President Donald Trump. But in this case, they didn't. And I'm interested to see why. We covered the reason why David Perdue would not win this governor election. And I think There were plenty of things that Brian Kemp did right, David Perdue did wrong, and how that all resulted in this loss. But that loss was not expected to be maybe 50 points at this point in time. David Perdue said the other day that he might lose on Tuesday, referring to today's primary, but he certainly is not down by 30 points. I'm afraid to tell you, Senator, you're not only down by 30, but you're down by 50 points. While the results are not going to be finalized potentially tonight, maybe they will be tomorrow morning, and the result could narrow up. At the end of the day, the victor is clear. With over a third of the vote counted, you're down 50 points. This could be a blowout of proportions we never even expected. There were times where realistically, David Perdue could have won this primary, and he's barely even cracking 20%. It's laughable. It's embarrassing, quite even. Trump's endorsement was supposed to carry him across the finish line. And yet, what we also found, which I mentioned previously, is that Trump couldn't get anyone behind David Perdue. I find that fascinating, considering that they all backed David Perdue less than a year ago. They were out there stumping for him. They were campaigning. They were sending out ads, spending their own money on his race. And yet they wouldn't even endorse him in a primary, even at the direction of President Donald Trump. It goes to say that Trump's endorsement might mean something in other states. But in Georgia, it seems as if voters, while they still might like him, aren't going to listen to him blindly. And you can't take down an incumbent like Brian Kemp. You might be able to, finagle yourself into an open race, to a plurality victory where it's a three-way race, where a Trump endorsement could bring you up. For example, the Pennsylvania Senate GOP primary, where Mehmet Oz was never even expected to be a contender, threw his hat in the ring, got the Trump endorsement, and isn't even cracking 33% of the vote, or is cracking around 33% of the vote. He will probably win that because he will be the Trump-endorsed candidate, but he's only ahead barely, and he's barely winning a three-way race against two other candidates who were not Trump-endorsed. Donald Trump's endorsement means a lot when the race isn't this competitive. And not only is this race super competitive, it actually isn't. It's competitive for David Perdue. It's not for Brian Kemp. It's at a point where Perdue could have won, but is now down by 50. I mean, I find this to be very interesting and fascinating that Brian Kemp can win by such a large amount. Brian Kemp will now go on to the general election and face off against Stacey Abrams. This is no shock to anyone. Stacey Abrams ran unopposed in the Democratic primary. I mean, I kid you not, she did not run against even one other Democratic candidate across the entire state, one of the most populous states in the country, ranking in the top 20 at least. And not a single person wanted to run against her. I find that to be telling, but it's because we knew Stacey Abrams was going to win. That's what should have happened for Brian Kemp. As the incumbent governor, you should not have faced opposition within your primary. You should not have faced the former president of the United States actively campaigning and endorsing an opposition candidate to you. But with all of that stacked against you, hats off to Brian Kemp in this case. I don't typically like to applaud politicians or candidates in any sense, but this is an astounding victory. No matter what type of political maneuvering or political, wit this took, regardless if someone says, Brian Kemp doing the gas tax, breakups or benefits is something that is ethical or right, especially as it closes with the primary. At the end of the day, what he used is what he had, the incumbency and things of that nature. And I'm not surprised that he did it, because it looked like for a brief period of time that Brian Kemp might actually lose his primary. I think Brian Kemp saw what happened in other states, or what is happening now in other states, where Trump is choosing somebody else than who the establishment Republicans want or who the incumbents are, and some of them are even losing, or he at least thought they were going to lose. In this case, I think Donald Trump has really, really overstepped his boundaries and really just completely messed up this play. I think Donald Trump could have done this a lot better. David Perdue also could have done this a lot better. But this is probably a huge electoral defeat to Donald Trump, and he's not even on the ballot, because this was going to be the true test. I could have told you a week ago that Brian Kemp was going to win this race, but could I have told you that he'd be up by 50% with this amount of vote reported? Could we even have imagined that Brian Kemp would be outperforming Herschel Walker? I mean, just take a look at the polls that were taken in conjunction with each other to see exactly how crazy this is to even fathom. The same poll, Trafalgar, shows the Georgia governor Republican primary, Kemp is up by 14. In the Senate Republican primary, Walker is up by 58. You take a look at other polls. Fox 5, Landmark Communications, Kemp plus 14, Kemp plus 30. Take a look at Landmark Communications. They asked the Senate race, Walker plus 48, an 18% difference there in terms of an increase. We head over to other polls. Let's see if we can find any more. Georgia governor, Georgia Senate, Walker plus 58, Kemp plus 32. There was a clear difference there. Maybe voters were afraid to tell pollsters that they were going to back Kemp over Perdue. Maybe there was a anti-Trump effect in that sense, but not really against Donald Trump, but more so against David Perdue. I'm just very fascinated by this result. I know I've been using that word a lot, but it is very true because I knew Brian Kemp was going to win this race. Did I think he would be winning by this amount? Absolutely not. It's getting closer. It's about 4 points, 3 points separating the two, Herschel Walker and Brian Kemp. But at the end of the day, both of them won by exceptional margins, very, very large ones. And, we are seeing results here that I don't think Donald Trump, David Perdue, or Brian Kemp could have even predicted a month ago, a week ago, a day ago. Looking at the numbers, looking at the data, to see Brian Kemp ahead of Herschel Walker across the state of Georgia is very interesting. And it will take a lot of time. Take a closer look at what's happening, take a closer look at the results here. Maybe the number percent of reported actually just went down from 38%. But at the end of the day, there is a clear victor tonight, and it is not Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump got his victory in Herschel Walker. That was expected. That was a given. And it should not have been to a point where Herschel Walker, being this clear nominee since April 2021, is performing worse than the governor that Donald Trump has been taking on for the past 2 years in a Republican primary across the state where Donald Trump soars in approval at 80 to 90% across the GOP. This is an embarrassment to Donald Trump. This is not a good look for the Trump wing of the Republican Party. But at the end of the day, Brian Kemp is going to govern as he always does. He's going to probably win that general election based off of where we stand right now. I think things definitely could change. The question is, will they? Herschel Walker is in a position where I think he could still win. Again, can he win? Probably. Will he win? Probably. But there is this, question about what happens if Walker loses. What happens if Kemp loses? These people can definitely lose. But for right now, they are the winners in tonight's election, and they are doing significantly better, at least on the side of Brian Kemp. He is doing significantly better than pundits predicted, than I predicted, than the media predicted, than even, I'm sure, his own campaign team, and even more than Brian Kemp and David Perdue predicted themselves. I think Kemp expected to win, Perdue expected probably to lose, but to the likes of this, to the size of this, never, never, ever. And tonight has been a rude awakening for President Trump and a lot of his allies who think that his endorsement will solely carry them to re-election or election in the first place. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2022 governor election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.